It's time for another episode of Let's Talk Business, featuring interviews with South Carolina business executives, community leaders, and government dignitaries. Let's Talk Business is a truly one-of-a-kind business-to-business talk show. And now, here's your host, longtime South Carolina business publisher, Rick Jenkins.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Let's Talk Business, episode number 6. I'm your host, Rick Jenkins, and I appreciate you joining us today. And whether you are joining us on 94.5 The Answer here in the upstate of South Carolina, or maybe you have joined one of our podcasts on Apple or Spotify or Google, or maybe you're watching our weekly YouTube series, regardless of how you found us, I am glad that you did so. We got a nice show for you today. We've got 4 executives that are going to be joining us. I'm going to run through who they're going to be here in just a sec, and then we will take a really quick break, and we'll come back and get the show started. One of my guests today is Megan Graham. Megan is the Vice President of Business Development at FGP, or Find Great People. And FGP is a staffing, a search, and a consulting firm headquartered in Greenville, but they do have offices in Columbia and Charleston and even Nashville, Tennessee. So we will spend some time with Megan. Derek Davis is going to be with us. Derek is the CEO, the owner, the founder of Intelli-NET. They are headquartered in Greenville. Intelli-NET is a complete technology solutions provider. They offer IT consultation, managed IT, network and cloud services, and computer support, and they do a bunch of things, and I always enjoy talking to Derek, and so he'll be with me shortly. And then our featured guest for a little bit later in the episode is Harry Lightsey. Harry is the South Carolina Secretary of Commerce. He has been in that position for a couple of years now. And then also William Floyd. William is the Executive Director of the South Carolina Department of Employment and Workforce, or better known as SCDEW. They're both here to talk about the statewide Education and Workforce Development Act that was passed not too long ago. But just briefly, Secretary of Commerce Lightsey, he joined Commerce in 2021. He was appointed by, of course, Governor Henry McMaster at that point when the former Secretary Bobby Hitt left. And during the past 2 years, Secretary Lightsey has secured some of the largest, most pivotal economic deals on record in South Carolina. I mean, we're talking several multi-billion-dollar deals. You can Google that and find out all kinds of things that have been happening in South Carolina the last couple of years under Secretary Lightsey's leadership. And William Floyd, he's only been in his position at SCDEW now for a couple of months, I believe. We'll ask him about that when he gets in, but he was appointed the executive director, like I said, about 3 months ago. And putting it as simply as possible for those who may not know, and I'm sure you do, but SCDEW, they monitor unemployment in South Carolina, and basically putting it as simple as possible, they help people find jobs. And so we're going to talk to Secretary Lightsey and Executive Director Floyd about the Education Workforce Development Act. When this bill was passed last month, it brought a ton of new responsibility to SCDEW. It moved some things from Commerce over to SCDEW to go under Executive Director Floyd's umbrella. And we'll talk about what that looks like and what that act means, the passing of that act means for businesses in South Carolina, because it is going to have a positive impact for businesses and for the economy in the Palmetto State. All right, folks, so it's a really good show we got coming up. We'll be back here. Just hang on tight. Only going to be gone about a minute and a half, and we'll get started soon. Be right back.
I bet you want a website that drums up business. You see, every business wants to have an effective online presence that helps their business grow.
At Drum Creative,
we guide you through our process that will drive results by clarifying your message with a beautiful design that's strategically optimized for search.
Visit our website at drumcreative.com
and let us help you drum up business by designing a website that speaks to your audience and delivers results.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Let's Talk Business, episode number 6. I am your host, Rick Jenkins, and appreciate you joining us. And I am here with our first guest now. His name is Derek Davis. Derek is the CEO, the founder, the owner of Intelli-NET. Intelli-NET is headquartered right here in Greenville. They are a complete technology solutions provider. They provide all kinds of things. He's going to tell us about it, but we're talking IT consultation, managed IT network and cloud services, and computer support, pretty much anything you need in the IT world. Derek can handle it. Derek, welcome.
Thank you. Good to see you again.
It is good to see you again.
Yeah.
It has been a while, but you and I have done this kind of thing before, and so I think we know how this works. You ready to get going?
I'm ready. Let's go.
Let's start off talking about artificial intelligence. Man, I tell you, when I was young in the 80s, there was a movie that came out called War Games, where, computer learned to teach itself, and it was going to start World War III on its own, right? And then you had the Terminator. And now all of a sudden, we have these things that make us wonder, my gosh, could some of that stuff be real? What say you? Do we need to really be worried about artificial intelligence?
I think we need to be worried about some of the implications of artificial intelligence, because it can be used in nefarious ways.
Right.
I mean, in general, it's going to be a huge improvement to the way things work in this world. And I've tinkered around with it some. I can see where on the fringes you could run into trouble with people using it against you. And some of those cases are things like revenge porn or what they call deep fake.
Deep fake, that's
and
right.
Stuff like that. And it definitely can be used for that.
Right.
But it also can be used for a tremendous amount of good. So I see it as more of a positive than a negative.
Positive outweighs the negative. I had never heard of the term deep fake until you and I did a video several years ago, and you brought up that term, and it was the first time that I'd heard it, and now I see it all the time, but that's scary stuff.
Well, it is scary, and one of the things that computers in general are good at these days are generating images. You see it in movies and things like that, for sure.
Yeah.
Where a computer would generate a stadium full of people or an army coming at you.
Yes.
But the same technology would allow me to put, my face on somebody that's a whole lot better looking than I am.
Right. Well, let's stick with AI and just take a little bit of a different turn and talk about chatbots.
Sure.
Now, that is something that is gaining a lot of steam. There's a little controversy over that in one way or another, but what are your thoughts on chatbots?
I think I actually like playing with things like ChatGPT, for example. I've actually used it to generate some scripts that I can run on computers that I would have had to tinker around with for, an hour. This thing spits it out in 10 seconds. So it's, from that perspective, it's really very beneficial. I can see where people might be a little bit concerned that at some point this level of artificial intelligence might replace them in certain fields. Certainly, I can issue a command and have it write a 400-word blog post on email security that would take me, a couple of hours to write and perfect, and it,
right,
spits it out in 30 seconds.
Right. Let's talk about cybersecurity in general. Several years ago, I felt like every time I turned on the news, someone was getting hacked. Some large company. Pre-COVID,
Sure.
There was a huge hacking issue that seemed to be, like I say, on TV every single day.
Yeah.
But I haven't heard as much about it recently. I don't know if it's because it's become so commonplace that it is not the news that it once was, or if we've become a little bit more proficient with our IT vendors in preventing it.
The answer to that question is both. There are certainly still high-profile hacking events that occur. The city of Spartanburg was basically shut down earlier this year. And it still happens to businesses all over the place. So you don't hear about it quite as much because you just it's not as big of a newsworthy item as it used to be. If someone like Lowe's or Home Depot or Target or somebody like that got taken down, you would hear about it. But a company here in Greenville, you would never hear about it.
Right.
The other side of that coin is we are better at preventing it and recovering from it than we used to be. It doesn't make it a lot less. It's still expensive to prevent cybersecurity events from happening and to recover from them quickly. But the technology is there for us to implement to help people prevent them as much as possible and recover as quickly as possible.
I would guess that as we become more and more of a mobile society, that hacking becomes a greater concern. I mean, I can't go anywhere without, none of us can go anywhere without our phone. And if I'm sitting at home, I'm never sitting there without my iPad. In the past, I think I've always had this comfort level, I believe, that my phone and my iPad were safe. Is that the case?
For the most part, they are. I mean, there's some security things built into iPads and phones that make them safer than they used to be. I'll tell you an interesting thing. I thought you were going to ask me about something like TikTok.
Yeah.
Because that's really where people get worried about their information getting stolen, is because people voluntarily put their information into a system like TikTok or any platform really. And if that platform gets infiltrated, or if the company just gives up the secrets, like TikTok just provides that information to the Chinese government, for example, that's things that can be used against you.
Yeah. Right. Tell me about cyber insurance requirements.
Nobody likes insurance, right?
Yep.
Except people that sell it.
Yeah.
It's a necessary evil because, as I said, companies are still getting attacked. Cyber crimes occur, ransomware, email theft, people steal your credentials, all kind of things like that still happen. And so companies face an exposure, a liability for cyber theft. The biggest problem that you might have in terms of cyber liability insurance is if you've got a bunch of people's information, medical or whatever, and it gets compromised, you're on the hook to protect the people that were compromised. And so you may end up having to pay just tons of money in litigation and to protect them going forward. And so that's what cyber insurance will help pay for that. It'll help pay for the losses in terms of recovering a business that is shut down for a cybersecurity attack. But to qualify for cybersecurity insurance now is much more difficult than it used to be. You have to prove that you are taking measures to protect yourself against the bad guys. And the easy things are things like turning on multi-factor authentication for your email, or for any web accounts, or having your Office 365 or Google tenant monitored for malicious activity from the backside. If you're not doing those things, there's a good chance you won't even qualify for cybersecurity insurance. So that's kind of where a company like us steps in to offer solutions to small businesses that can help protect themselves, at least give you some idea that something's going on so you can stop it.
All right, Derek. Well, I'll get you out of here on this. Why don't you just share with our listeners and our viewers a few tips? If you are running a small business and maybe you started your own business or you're in the process of getting a small business off the ground, what are some types of things that you should consider from an IT perspective to make sure that that you're doing what you need to do?
Sure. The smallest businesses can and should afford some level of protection. You need rock solid antivirus that's monitored by a security operations center. If you're just getting the cheapest antivirus that you can get, there's a good chance it's not really protecting you, for example. You need your email filtered. Microsoft can do that. There are certainly third-party companies that we use that can do things like that. And you need to set up basic things like I mentioned, multi-factor authentication. Things like that will stop a big chunk of cyber crimes. Obviously, it won't stop all of them, but basic things like that, you just have to have good hygiene in terms of your computer security. And we can certainly help small companies with tasks like that.
Right, of course. Got to use some common sense these days, right?
Common sense is not as common as it used to be.
And not as sensical as it used to be. I hear you. Folks, that is Derek Davis. Derek is the CEO, the owner, the founder of Intelli-NET, South Carolina, an IT all solutions company providing all types of IT solutions, headquartered in Greenville, but doing business everywhere. Derek, appreciate you.
Certainly.
And folks, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back here in just another minute and a half with another guest. See you in a minute. It's time for a quick tip. Here's a brief 60-second snippet of advice on financial and retirement planning with our expert, Jeff Froman. Jeff is a financial advisor with Thomas & Froman, a financial advisory practice of Ameriprise Financial Services.
Thanks for having me back, Rick. Jeff Froman here with Ameriprise Financial. We're going to talk today for the first financial tip of the week about taxes and saving. So there are three types of tax regimes that you can save into. The first is tax deferred, your traditional IRAs, annuities, your employer savings plan like a 401k. Next is the tax-free. Everybody likes tax-free. So these are your Roth IRAs and some types of cash value life insurance. Be careful with these. They can be complicated. Talk to an advisor about them. And finally, taxable accounts. These are pay-as-you-go. So you're paying capital gains or taxes on interest. These are brokerage accounts that you might hold a stock or a bond in, CDs at your bank, or even your savings account at the bank. Why do you want to have some money in each of these tax regimes? It's so that you are controlling your taxes. This is especially important in retirement. You might be able to reduce your taxes. And finally, you want to be in charge of what account you're taking the money out of and how it's taxed. Thank you for having me. Rick, back to you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Let's Talk Business. Appreciate you coming back with us. I am here with our second guest, and that is Megan Graham. Megan is the Vice President of Business Development for FGP, or Find Great People. And as I said at the top of the show, you know who FGP is. They are a staffing, a search, and a consulting firm headquartered in Greenville. They also have offices in Columbia and Charleston, and even over in Nashville, Tennessee. And Megan, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, well, I'm glad you are here. A couple episodes ago, we had your colleague, Steve Hall, in joining us.
Yes.
And so I've known Steve for quite some time, and so I always enjoy talking to him. So it's always good to have FGP in the house.
Glad to be here.
So before we get started, just tell me quickly about what you do. As the business development person for FGP, what is that? What do you do?
So I have responsibility for our integrated staffing division. So to explain that quickly, that would be any technical or mid-level leadership role down to what you would consider an entry-level opportunity in our business. That team is roughly made up of 15 to 16 business development folks and then 20 to 25 recruiters, depending on the time of year.
Right. So you got a pretty big staff.
I do, yeah. Awesome team.
And you get to travel?
I
Going
do.
To the different offices?
Yeah, so I'm actually based in Chapin, South Carolina.
Okay.
So I sit really conveniently equal from our Charleston, Columbia, and Greenville offices.
Well, how about that?
I do my best to be in those offices weekly.
Yeah.
Charleston sometimes can be biweekly, but a great snapshot of the state.
All right, the hiring market. My goodness, has your industry had some roller coaster to it over the course of the last 4 years, right?
Yes.
COVID, we're 4 years removed from COVID. That's hard to believe. But right before COVID hit, we were, from an unemployment rate perspective, we're talking minuscule numbers in South Carolina, record-breaking numbers. Everybody had a job for the most part. Then COVID hits, and my gosh, does it go the other way? But then it starts going up and down and up and down. All kinds of stuff. Tough job for you guys, I would assume, over the last few years, keeping up with which direction we're going.
Yes. Yeah, very tough, but we're lucky to have very agile teams. So we have seen demand shift pretty generously this year towards more of a staffing augment model with most of our clients. So we see our clients utilizing temporary staffing in a way that they didn't in 23 and really in 22 either, in early 23, 22. I think the back half of this year, we will see clients just being very intentional with how they bring on talent. mitigating any risk to overhiring in their direct hire or long-term group, and using temporary folks in just a more intentional way to meet business needs so they can slowly assess what the market is doing and who they may need without committing to a permanent, though there's no such thing as a permanent hire, but direct hire, if you will. So
remote and hybrid schedules became all the talk a couple years ago. At one point, I think we switched. Employees began to have all the leverage in that relationship for a period of time.
Yeah.
At least that's the way it appeared for me, an outside looking in. But it seems to me that is switching back now, even though we are continuing. Of course, companies continue to have a lot of remote opportunities and hybrid opportunities. But what have you seen?
We're seeing a normalization of that trend as well. Flexibility is still extremely important, as is your candidate and internal employee experience. But by and large, South Carolina specifically is a state where you are in the office 5 days a week, or typically you're working a hybrid schedule. When we have folks in our state that are 100% remote, they're concentrated primarily in two areas, one of which is technology talent. Simply because you have to access that talent and they aren't always in the state. And so that's just been by nature of business need rather than the preference of the business that has to be 100% remote. The other piece that I would say is we have a lot of folks that have relocated into South Carolina that work for organizations outside of the area that are 100% remote. So our remote population in the state is growing. I'm just not necessarily convinced they're in employers within our state, if that makes sense.
No, it does. It does. And a couple years ago, as I said, it seemed that employees had plenty of leverage, hence the great resignation, as we called it, right? Folks were quitting right and left because all of a sudden they found they had the leverage. They found that this is how I want my job to look, and if you can't give it to me, then someone else will. You said that trend is now normalizing. Do you think it's going to get back to where it was before?
I'm not sure that we'll ever recover from a candidate-driven market, which is how we describe this internally at Find Great People. The reason that I'm not sure we will recover fully is because our population overall is shrinking. And so high-skilled roles are always going to be difficult to find, particularly accounting and finance, CPA track, engineering, health sciences with additional accreditations. I think in the very near and long-term future, those folks may be able to be a bit more discerning in their search process. But by and large, we are seeing a normalization of the candidate-driven market. We're actually also seeing candidates pause. So even if a new opportunity comes in that might be better than the seat that they're in or with the organization, they're pausing because they've just recently made a change and they don't want to show that lack of tenure. So we're feeling a pause on the company side so that they're being intentional about who they're bringing in and not overhiring. We did not feel that last year. Companies were happy to overhire when they found the talent. But then that pause on the company side duplicates on the candidate side, because a lot of candidates have just made a change in the last 3 years. And so they want to show tenure in their current seat. So it's an interesting time in the market.
Let's go back to what you said a minute ago. You talked about that contract and temporos have become a little more popular these days. Let's go back to that a second. Why is contract work becoming so much more prevalent?
That's a great question. And we see this often in times of economic uncertainty or market noise. And the reason that we see that demand rise during those times is because business owners at the end of the day are humans, right? And there's uncertainty around their business. And we are all susceptible to market noise. So when they hear, gosh, we may be in a recession, we may not be in a recession, what they do is they say, okay, I know we need 2 people in this department. Could we make that into 1 full-time position? And then could we hire augmented temporary staff to help us sprint towards this business goal but not take on the permanent salary long term.
I suppose in those situations, not only are you not taking on a permanent salary, but the benefits as well. So you have savings there.
A lot of embedded costs.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
The other piece that I would say that we've seen by way of temporary demand is that particularly around technology, when you're sprinting towards a product or a go live date, at the end of that, you need far less people to keep that product or go live date serviceable. And so we'll see a spike in, say, 4 or 5 developers that are needed on a project for 6 months, and then the project is just truly over. So it vacillates between those two reasons.
All right, Megan, I'm going to get you out of here on this. I want to talk about soft skills for a second. Is it my imagination, or does it seem like soft skills are becoming harder and harder to find?
It is not your imagination. I think what we have to remember as leaders or professionals with more business tenure is that is probably our responsibility in our newer folks to create awareness. We have a lot of recent graduates that are fantastic and highly educated. The reality is their communication most of the time is done through written, whether that is text or a chat channel for their university. So the reality is, unless they have very strong mentors or a mom, dad, or one or the other that works in business and requires them to exercise those muscles, they may not have that skill set when they enter the workforce. I have the luxury of leading a lot of recent graduates in my seat, and it's actually one of my favorite things to do. Those that are coming out of college are highly capable. And so in those situations, I would really encourage leadership to just go straight to it, have the conversations to say, listen, you've got the skill set all day long. Let me talk you through how we polish up communication, how we show up dressed for the job we want, not the one we have, right? But absolutely, those are coaching points. And gosh, I remember the first interview I ever had in my life was at a McDonald's, and my mom purchased me a business suit.
To go to McDonald's.
Correct.
It wouldn't happen today.
Correct. And so we've all gotten away from the formality of soft skills and how much they matter. And so I think the best thing you can do for your earlier career teammates is create awareness and make sure that you tie it to their personal growth and how important that is.
Megan, good stuff.
Yeah.
Appreciate you, Joel.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me.
You are welcome. Folks, that is Megan Graham. She is the Vice President of Business Development for FGP, or Find Great People. Don't go anywhere. We're going to be back in about a minute and a half, and we're going to be talking to Secretary of Commerce Harry Lightsey, and we'll see you in a second.
Thank you for tuning in for another episode of Let's Talk Business, a weekly one-of-a-kind B2B talk show with interviews with South Carolina business executives, community leaders, and government dignitaries. Let's Talk Business airs every Saturday at 4 p.m. on 94.5 The Answer, or download it on the most popular platforms, Apple, Google, and Spotify. You can watch the video of each episode on YouTube. Search Let's Talk Business South Carolina. Now let's get back to the show with your host, longtime South Carolina business publisher Rick Jenkins.
Welcome back, everyone, to Let's Talk Business, episode number 6. I am your host, Rick Jenkins, and I appreciate you coming back with us. And we have our featured guests, plural, with me now. And I am really glad to welcome Secretary of Commerce Harry Lightsey and William Floyd, who is the Executive Director of SCDEW, to the show. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having us.
It is good to have you guys here. We were talking right before we came on air, and these guys, our studio is located, of course, in Greenville, and these guys have made a trip from Columbia over to Greenville to join us on the show to have a conversation today about the Statewide Education and Workforce Development Act. It was passed a couple months ago, and we want to find out all about that and what that means for businesses in South Carolina and for economic development in the Palmetto State. It does have some interesting layers to it that I think are going to impact all of those, and we'll find out all that from these guys here in a second. But before we get into that, I want to talk to you guys about, just real briefly about you on a personal level for a second. I had not had a chance to meet either one of you before a few minutes ago, and Mr. Secretary, Secretary Lightsey, we'll start with you. You're a South Carolina boy, right?
Yeah, I grew up in Columbia.
Yeah.
Went to Dreher High School, graduated from Dreher, went to Princeton University undergraduate, came back to South Carolina, graduated from the University of South Carolina School of Law, and then had a legal career that was mostly in the telecom world. Worked for several of the Bell companies. About the last 10 years of that, I had management responsibilities and retired from AT&T in 2009. And then in 2012, I went to work for General Motors in Washington, D.C., with responsibilities for emerging technologies in the automobile industry. So my corporate career really spanned the telecommunications world and then the automobile world.
That is quite the resume that leads you into a job that one could say is potentially the most important job in the state of South Carolina these days. And I see you hesitate for a sec as I said that, but I believe that one could make that argument.
Well, it's an interesting job, and it's a great department. I think you'll probably hear Director Floyd say the same thing about his agency, but the people that are in the Department of Commerce are incredibly dedicated public servants who are really working every day to enhance the quality of life for the citizens of the state of South Carolina, and it's exciting to be around them.
You have been in the job for a couple years, appointed by Governor McMaster. When was that exactly, sir?
2021.
Okay. And so a little over 2 years.
Right about 2 years.
You replaced Bobby Hitt.
Yes.
And you have had a nice run of it over the past couple years. We have had some serious economic development announcements. It seems like this state has been churning out serious economic development announcements for a long daggone time, right? But the last couple years, we've looked pretty good.
We've done incredibly well. And, the last year, 2022, we announced over $10 billion in capital investment in our state, creating over 14,000 jobs. But these are very transformational times. You'll hear this over and over again today. The things that are going on in the country and in the world create a dynamic that makes this a truly transformational era that is impacting not just South Carolina, but the entire Southeast and the world in general.
And William Floyd, sir, you have been in your present job only a couple months now. As the executive director of SCDEW, the Department of Employment and Workforce. You been there, like I said, a couple months, but tell us about you. Where were you before? What led you into this chair today?
Sure. I'm a South Carolinian by birth.
Yes, sir.
I have lived here all my life, but my practice has taken me to most of the states of the nation. So I grew up all over South Carolina, both little towns and big towns, and in between. And one thing led to another. I went to law school and then began practicing labor and employment law, and did that for 35 years at 2 different law firms. And it was a privilege to represent the many employers out there in both in South Carolina, large and small, as well as outside of this region. And the common denominator for them is employees, qualified employees. So when I was working as a labor and employment lawyer, I was sorely tempted to go into public service to see it from the government side, to see how we can help on a more lasting basis. And that's what led me to DEW. And through DEW, the Department of Employment and Workforce, we're able to work from the outside, truly from the government, trying to help this wonderful issue that we have in South Carolina, and that is so many jobs and not enough people. And we're trying to match them up because of the great potential there.
Tell me about SCDEW and what it does.
Yeah, like Secretary Lightsey, it's a privilege to be part of the team at SCDEW, so the South Carolina Department of Employment and Workforce. And we do several things, and all of them are focused on employment and workforce development. Mm-hmm. So one of the things we do first and foremost is connect people with jobs and jobs with people. In addition to that, we have economists who help us look ahead and see what jobs are going to be needed in the future, what jobs are needed now, so they help us chart the course. And then, of course, as as we saw during the pandemic, sometimes we hit tough times economically, and we need to fall back on a safety net of unemployment insurance. And so we did that a little bit during the pandemic, as a lot of it as a nation, a little bit in our state. But the governor really had us opening up, and we were far in advance of all of our peers. And that really led to some of the great successes that we're enjoying right now. But that's what we do at DEW. We connect people with jobs and jobs with people.
Mr. Secretary, tell me about Act number 67, the Statewide Education and Workforce Development Act. Give me that elevator speech on this act and what it does for South Carolina.
Yeah, well, as far as what I think it does for the state of South Carolina is it really places accountability and responsibility for our workforce, for getting folks ready for the jobs of the future in one agency, which is DEW. And I think that is a great thing. Having too many cooks in the kitchen and too many different and disparate efforts going in different directions, uncoordinated, created some communications issues and coordination issues that I think this act really addresses by simplifying responsibilities, and that's certainly why we support it.
So, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think one of the biggest parts of this act is it simply moves some things from under the Commerce umbrella to under the SCDEW umbrella. And so you touched on it, but tell me why that matters. First of all, tell me what those things are. There's two, I think, specifically that we want to talk about, but tell me what those things are and why does it really matter that they are under the umbrella over here of Mr. Floyd and not under Commerce?
Right. So the two things, we had a group of folks who worked in the state, throughout the state. They each had a geographical territorial responsibility, and their job was to work with the schools in that particular area and the employers in that particular area and help students understand what employers were in their area and what they were looking for in terms of employment opportunities, and to really facilitate those kind of communications. And they were called Regional Workforce Advisors, or RWAs. And that group of folks is being moved from the Department of Commerce over to DEW. In addition to that, Commerce had the responsibility for running an organization that was called the Coordinating Council for Workforce Development. And the Secretary of Commerce was the chair of that. And it was largely made up of a variety of state agencies and leadership of state agencies whose agencies in one way or another connected with workforce development for the state. And it was an overall coordinating committee. And the responsibility for that is now shifted to DEW. The director is the chairman of that coordinating council. The Secretary of Commerce retains a seat on the coordinating council as a spokesman for the business community, and we certainly will continue to work on that and to be there to represent what we're hearing from the business community. But having that over at DEW, which has the expertise that you've just heard about and has such broad other responsibilities with regard to workforce, we believe is the appropriate move, because they're the group that has the most of the responsibility for the state in terms of workforce development.
It sounds like that what was your purview. You sit on the council, you chaired that council, and now you are chairing it. So from your perspective, what does this mean?
This means good things for South Carolina. Commerce has done an incredible job selling the opportunities of our state and to create new employers with a great number of jobs or needing employees. And so to meet that opportunity, the Coordinating Council for Workforce Development has, through this bill, through the Act, has expanded. I call it a tent. They broadened the tent a little bit, because what we found is that a number of state agencies were having a little pieces of the workforce development that needed to be done. But there was a sliver here and a sliver there, but it was often not as coordinated as it should have been. And so by broadening the tent to bring some other agencies in there, as well as other stakeholders, employers, small employers, large employers, our public officials underneath that tent, then we can better understand what everyone's doing, align those efforts, coordinate those efforts, and communicate those efforts to those who really need it, the parents, the students, the job seekers. That's what this bill does.
Regional workforce advisors, how many are there?
There are a total of 12. We currently have 10 of those slots filled. They've been filled. At Commerce, they have assembled a great team, and we have 2 of those postings that are open now that we'll be filling soon. They're essentially the connection point, or part of the connection point between school to work.
And of course, they are set up in some type of geographical nature. And what does that look like?
Yeah, they are aligned with all the local workforce areas, which have preceded them, and so they are each assigned to normally a multi-county area to work with the guidance counselors, the superintendents, the teachers of the various schools, normally high schools, sometimes middle schools.
Tell me what are, however you all want to handle this or answer it, what are their responsibilities? What are their main responsibilities?
I'll go ahead and start. Their main responsibility is to understand the local employer's needs, communicate that to the educators, and the educators communicate back to the employers, so that we can fine-tune what I call the pipeline, the education pipeline, of make sure what the students are learning, that they know their options after they're leaving, that they understand while they're there and learning in school, high school, middle school, that they are achieving the education goals they need to achieve, doing the skills, refining the skills, so that if they want to, they can go straight from school, high school, directly to work. Some of the marvelous jobs that are out there. Right now we have more than 100,000 jobs currently open in the state. So someone right now coming out of high school even would have that opportunity, given the proper skill and communication, to go to one of those jobs. So the RWAs are part of that connection point between those employers and the educators. There are others that do that too, but the RWAs, we're fortunate to have them at our agency now.
You know, I have this conversation with a lot of people sitting on this show. I've had the conversation and want to continue exploring here a little bit with people like Dr. Tim Hardy, the president of the South Carolina Technical College System, or maybe Dr. Keith Miller, who's the president of Greenville Tech locally, or our friends at Lockheed Martin, or BMW, or wherever that might be. And it's this. In South Carolina, of course, manufacturing is king. Advanced manufacturing is king. You know, we've gone from a textile supported workforce in South Carolina to more of an advanced manufacturing world that we live in. But you know what? We're continuing to have trouble making people understand. And when I say people, I think I really mean moms and dads, because that is who is that's who the kids are listening to some degree, right? We're having trouble making moms and dads understand that these advanced manufacturing jobs are not what you might think they are. And as I always say, this ain't your daddy's manufacturing, right? It ain't your granddaddy's manufacturing. And if I'm in your all shoes and I'm really thinking about what these regional workforce advisors do, in my mind, that there would be something there about them trying to convince moms and dads and show moms and dads what these jobs really are. You know, you're not turning a screwdriver and a bolt on a car. You might be managing the robot that's doing that, right? I mean, it's just a different look to things. So tell me, do you all have those same concerns? Do you hear those same types of things? And is that the same kinds of things that the RWAs are discussing?
The short answer is yes. The RWAs are part of the team that are communicating those opportunities to the parents and the students, just part of it. But what we found is that more communication is needed, because there are wonderful opportunities out there in the workforce. And you don't have to go to a 4-year college to go and get one of those opportunities. You don't have to have a PhD to do that. Rather, you could go to one of Dr. Hardy's schools and within either months or a couple of years, be able to write your ticket to a wonderful job that's going to be pay family sustaining wages long term with little or no tuition that person would have to invest. And you compare that to the typical 4-year track or longer. And it's something that the parents and the students need to understand, that it is different in South Carolina, different in a good way because of the wonderful employers that Department of Commerce has brought to our state, that you can achieve for your family things now that you couldn't have done previously without some higher education. There's a place for all that education. The workforce pipeline is what I call it. Education is the biggest feeder of that. So it's important that the students learn during elementary, middle, and high school, but they also learn about the opportunities, what's at the end of that, and they are untold. And part of what the Coordinating Council for Workforce Development does is by getting all these agencies together and stakeholders, we look at different ways to communicate that information. And we look at different ways to do it pervasively as well. So as we continue moving forward with the CCWD, we will put an emphasis on communicating digitally, video, etc., so that the parents and teachers and their students will know about these opportunities.
We have always evaluated our education system by how many of our kids are going off to college. And what kind of colleges are they going off to? Are they going off to elite colleges, or are they going off to, state universities, or what type of colleges are they going off to? And that is just incredibly misplaced. We should be evaluating our education system by what types of jobs their graduates are occupying, and I think those are some of the things that we need to start talking about.
Agreed. Let's take a quick break, and we'll be back to finish the conversation with Secretary Lightsey and Director Floyd. Don't go anywhere. Be back in about 60 seconds.
Thank you for tuning in for another episode of Let's Talk Business, a weekly one-of-a-kind B2B talk show with interviews with South Carolina business executives, community leaders, and government dignitaries. Let's Talk Business airs every Saturday at 4 p.m. on 94.5 The Answer, or download it on the most popular platforms, Apple, Google, and Spotify. You can watch the video of each episode on YouTube. Search Let's Talk Business South Carolina. Now let's get back to the show with your host, longtime South Carolina business publisher Rick Jenkins.
All right, welcome back, everyone, to Let's Talk Business. I'm your host, Rick Jenkins. Appreciate you joining us. And once again today, I am sitting here right now with South Carolina Secretary of Commerce Harry Lightsey and Executive Director of SCDEW, William Floyd. And we are talking about the Statewide Education and Workforce Development Act. And gentlemen, again, thanks for being here. Appreciate you joining us again today. Let's talk about this act in terms of how it impacts South Carolina businesses. Tell me, Mr. Secretary, let's start with you, sir.
Yeah, so I think in terms of the businesses we have, both the existing businesses that are here in the state, the new businesses that are coming to this state, we've talked a little bit about their needs in terms of workforce. And make no mistake about it, every business we talk to, whether they're small or big, whether they've been in the state for 100 years or whether they're just coming to the state, their number one issue is workforce. Am I going to find the kind of workers that I need to be successful in my business? And that is their top issue, without a doubt. It is incredibly important that we can show them that this state is working hard on that issue. And I think this act reflects that. And by putting the responsibility in the one agency's hands, they know where to go, they know who to look for. My agency, our mission is to create economic opportunities that increase choices for all South Carolinians. And our vision is to embrace the future. And that really is the core mission of our agency. What we are really focused on is creating opportunities for our citizens. And that's where our expertise is. We don't have deep expertise in terms of workforce development, work experience in terms of connecting people with jobs. That is really not within the wheelhouse of my agency. And I think that this act, by moving that responsibility over to DEW, which does have huge responsibility and resources to address our workforce issues, is going to mean an incredible amount for the businesses of South Carolina in addressing their number one issue.
Director Floyd.
Yeah, the Coordinating Council for Workforce Development provides what, again, I've described as a tent. And government does not have all the answers by any stretch. Having worked with employers for over 35 years in the private and public sector, nobody has all the answers, but together, by collaborating as partners, we can come up with refined, applicable answers. So the CCWD will include public officials, public agencies, but most importantly, large and small employers too, as we literally come to the table together to try to, for example, set a path, I call it the blueprint, Unified State Plan of workforce development. So we look ahead, and we're going to be hearing from the employers, and we've already heard from employers, and Commerce has heard from employers about different ways to approach it, be it apprenticeships, internships, dual enrollment with our technical colleges. Those are just a few of the ways. It is not one size fits all. Some employers have more opportunities and needs than others. Not all employers are really big. Most of the employers in South Carolina are smaller. And so it's our opportunity to meet them where they are and provide this information both from economists, from employers, from public sector, of coming up with ways and approaches to address their workforce needs.
We talked in the beginning about the Coordinating Council, the council that is moving, of course, from the Commerce umbrella to the DEW umbrella. How many people are on that council?
Over 30.
And tell me the types of folks we're talking about.
So one segment, probably the predominant segment, are state agencies that are touching on workforce development. Some more so than others, but all of them are touching on them in one way or the other. So we have agencies. We have elected officials that will be there as well, appointed by the House or the Senate, for example. We have large employers, we have small employers on there as well. We have education on there represented as well, and technical colleges as well as the four-year schools. So that's what's coming to the table. And between all of those, we're going to be working together to come up with strategies and opportunities to address these issues.
Gentlemen, I appreciate it. Appreciate you both being here. It's good information. Anything else to share with our listeners or our viewers before we go?
Yeah, I just would like to say one thing. I think, you made a great point about the fact that the jobs that are here in South Carolina today, the factory of today is not like the factory of my youth, and it's certainly very different. But what I think is really critically important is that the jobs in our businesses 5 years from now are not going to be the jobs that are here today. We are going through this incredible transformation. We're dealing with technologies like robotics, like artificial intelligence, and digitization that are going to transform, I think, every business, whether it's small or large, in ways that we can't even begin to imagine today. So I think, this is an issue that will continue to be the number one issue that business is facing. And I think that by putting this all with DEW, it gives us the opportunity to be very proactive and very forward-leaning as we lean into this transformation of business, to look at not only what the jobs are here today, but what are going to be the skill sets that are going to be needed for our students and our citizens to be successful in the world of tomorrow.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us. That is Secretary of Commerce Harry Lightsey and the Executive Director of SCDEW, William Floyd. Folks, that completes another episode of Let's Talk Business. I'm glad you joined us. Again, as always, check us out on 94.5 The Answer, or you can access our podcast on any of popular podcast platforms that are out there, or again, we have a weekly YouTube video series. And regardless of how you join us, I appreciate it. Thanks, and we will see you next time.